Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say, staying happy and healthy and especially hydrated. And in this video, I have a bunch of stories from all over the place again. I have a story from Wyoming, a story from Mosul, a story from North Carolina, from Texas, and the story of what could be a black-eyed person encounter. So, if that sounds like something you're interested in, definitely pull up a stump with me and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. I've told this story before, but what's one more time, eh? When I was a kid, my parents were going through this bitter custody battle for me and my little sister, and I feel like it attracted something to us. This one day, my dad picks me up from his mother's house to drop me off at my other grandmother's house so she can watch me because it was my mom's day with me or whatever. My grandmother always told me if the blinds in the front window are up, then I'm home, but if they're down, nobody's home. And when we got there, the blinds were down. I tried to tell my dad, but he didn't want to hear any of it. In fact, he was always a bit abrasive towards me and seemed to like my sister more. He had spare keys to this house, so he opens it and yells in, "I'm leaving him here so his mom can pick him up." And then he left. He was assuming someone was home. But, like I said, there was nobody home. After I realized this, I started running amok and doing stupid stuff that you do when you're a kid, like eat cookies and all that junk. Now, after a while, the whole vibe of that floor of the house changes. It changes to a sense of dread, so much so that I actually go upstairs because I'm just feeling really terrible on the first floor. And my grandparents' house was an old 3-story house. It had this dumbwaiter, but only the chute, so it was like a straight fall down to the basement. Something is compelling me to open the chute and look down into the basement. I do so, and there's a woman down there in all white, with white skin, and she's staring up at me. Her eyes are pitch black. She motions to me with her arms as if saying, "Jump." And then I hear voices that are not my own all around me, commanding me to jump. I slam the little door and I run upstairs to my grandma's room. I hide under the covers until my grandmother gets home. I tell her, but she doesn't believe me. No one ever believed me, except for my sister. And this wasn't our only encounter with the black-eyed lady. My sister said that it showed up at my dad's house as well. It tried to get her to play in the tub when it was full of water. She would have drowned. I don't know if it's the same type of thing, but this is the closest thing I've had to a black-eyed person encounter. I live in Wyoming and have all my life, and I hunt a lot, obviously. I go up to my family friends' land in the northwestern part of the state to hunt. There's about 5 or so medium-sized cabins there. I sleep in one by myself. It has the kitchen and living room for the community in it, and I'll skip ahead to about day 3 when I was there. I was having fun with all the other people that were hunting there. This night rolls around, and we go back to my cabin. I watch TV for a while, and I'm trying to fall asleep. There's this big window on the wall of the living room which I'm sleeping in. There's some deer outside eating. In with them, I see this huge buck. It definitely would have been a national record. I go outside with my mag light. I want to get a picture to show everyone in the morning, and then go after him that day. I walk out, and I shine the light. The other deer are now gone. Just the big buck remains. I turn my flashlight on. The buck absolutely loses it. making noises and jumping around and everything. I think it's just CWD at the time, chronic wasting disease. It's a big problem here. I was about to go over to the owner's cabin to see if I could put it out of its misery. So I go in, and then I go outside again, and the deer's gone now. I go over to his cabin anyways, and I ask him. He says yes, but he wants the horns. At least I get to be the one that put it down. I get into my hunting gear, my flashlight with my extra batteries, and I begin to track him into the woods. After about 30 minutes into tracking, the tracks show that he was walking in a zigzag and dragging his feet, which is a symptom of CWD. Then, the tracks abruptly stop, and they change into a track that I haven't seen before, ever. And I think, that's weird, but I keep tracking it out of interest and mild concern. I get into this clearing, and the tracks stop again. The wind starts blowing. This isn't cause for concern because it's Wyoming, and the wind is always blowing. I start to look for another set of tracks when I hear a mumbling. It says, I think it has wasting. It sounds like exactly what I said to the owner. And then I hear, put it down. We'll get rid of the body in the morning. I'm literally mind blown in every sense of the word. I shoulder my gun towards where the noise came from. Then I hear, hey man, what's up? In my voice. I don't hesitate. I fire. There's this horrible noise that comes after, like a cross between a mother losing her child and a pig being ripped apart by bears. Suddenly, I see the silhouette of something in the trees. It's standing on 2 feet, easily taller than me by a few feet, and I'm 6'5". I turn around and haul ass back to my cabin. I lock the door. I post up with my rifle at that big window. I occasionally look back to the door. I sit like this all night. The morning comes and the owner knocks on the door. He says, come outside. I peek outside to make sure that it's not that thing. It actually is him, thank God. I go outside. I follow him to where the deer that everyone had killed were being stored. Every single one of them were picked clean of meat, but the bones are still there. We notice something. The horns are also gone from all of them. I never tell anybody about this when my name is attached to it because they just won't believe me. I just try to forget it. I still have no idea what I saw that night. Everyone in camp just blamed it on a bear, but that doesn't explain why the horns were gone. So I will say that the stuff that happened here was a little graphic, so just to get that out of the way. But here goes. There was an ISIS stronghold north of Mosul that is notorious for being very difficult to infiltrate. For months, no progress was made at all. Then, out of nowhere, all the attacks stop. 2 scouts get sent to check and then don't come back. A week goes by and there's no signs of life in the stronghold. Keep in mind this territory was a few hundred square kilometers and had a few thousand people in it, so it should be quite active. Eventually, a party of soldiers gets permission to check on the stronghold. They go in. The place is silent. They get to a barrack. They open it up and are immediately hit by the smell of rot. A few dozen people have their upper torsos hanging upside down on the ceiling and their lower torsos standing up. There's some doors that are barricaded and some that are blown open. Every person in that place is found in the exact same way. Even the women and children had this done to them. Initially, they thought that there was a new, extremely violent militia that got to them first, but there were no known militias in that area apart from a few YPG parties. There was a few security cameras around the place. All of them were smashed up, and the footage seemed to show that around 2 a.m. there was a lot of shadows that appeared, and then it just went blank. No one really knows what happened to that place, but we're all told to avoid it, and no one's allowed to go there anymore. This happened way back when I was 14 years old. My older brother, who I was with and I'll call Tyler, was 16 at the time. We're still super close. So we used to live at this one place that had a lot of woods behind the property, and it went on, at the time, what seemed like forever. So during Christmas break, all the trees were dead and the ground is really thick with leaves. We go out for a walk like we often do. We don't talk because we can't hear each other over the crunching leaves. We get to this creek, which may or may not be deep into someone else's private property. We were never that sure. It's not very deep, but it's a few yards wide. It's a sandy creek bed, and there's leaf clumps by the banks. We are about 15 feet from the water. Once there, Tyler's on a rotting log talking, telling me a story about what I don't remember. I'm standing nearby. It's windless and chilly. The sky is overcast, and I suddenly felt uneasy even before anything remotely creepy happened. It's at this point that there was a noise across the creek, like a footstep. Tyler stops talking. The noise comes back, and we see leaves kick up on the other side of the creek. It's like a little puff of leaves just kind of explode upward, with a crunching sound that you'd expect. It's hard to describe, I know. It keeps happening across the creek, with maybe about 2 seconds in between the crunches. Each crunch is a few feet away from the last. There must be some animal over there playing in the leaves, says Tyler. He assumes it's probably a larger than normal field mouse, probably that's routinely jumping for some reason. It's also somehow covering a lot of ground between jumps, but animals can just be weird sometimes. The crunching continues though, and it starts to come toward us in a straight line. It reaches the creek, and then there's silence. We watch the far bank to see what it is. Seconds pass, and then there's a crunch on our side of the creek. I think it's gotta be the wind, or like one of those wind vortexes or something. My heart's pounding. I haven't moved. I feel paralyzed. The crunches continue. I'm staring at the spot, looking for something in the leaves. It's like there's something running, but there's nobody there. I snap out of whatever daze I was in, and Tyler's gone. My heart stops. He's gone. He's vanished. He's not on the log or anywhere. He was there just 1 second ago. There is nowhere to hide with all the leafless, skinny trees. If he touched the ground at all, even far away, I would hear it. I can't stress enough how there's no way that he could have disappeared that quickly. My thought was, did he get taken? And then there's a crunch on the ground, right in front of me, like 2 footsteps. I start running. I don't even know if the thing chased me at all, or if when I ran, if it followed me. I'm just running for my life back home, and I don't even look back. My chest is killing me, but I can't stop running. I have never been this scared. I'm looking wildly for Tyler. He's not anywhere. I should have seen him. I get to my backyard, where my mom and Tyler are both waiting for me. He's alive. They look terrified, asking what happened, and I can't even breathe enough to explain. My lungs are frozen. My mom says, "Tyler says you disappeared." There's a look of confusion on my face. Apparently his account is that the crunching stopped right when the thing crossed the creek. I remembered a few more crunches on our side of the shore, and that I had vanished, and he had freaked out and ran to get help. I insisted that he disappeared first, and then I ran. But he says that they have been waiting there for a full minute, and my mom agrees. And I say, what? That doesn't make any sense. Even now, it doesn't make sense. The timelines are all wrong. Why was I that slow getting back? My mom says we both got spooked and ran at the same time, but that doesn't explain how he got back so fast, and according to them, I was the one that disappeared. My mom is worried about us because of how freaked out we were. We go inside to get warm. I'm told to take a shower to clear my head. Me and Tyler talk about this non-stop for months. It becomes a whole thing where we finally build up the courage to return to the creek 6 months later, but nothing happens then. I don't tell a whole lot of people because what do I tell them? That something invisible separated me and my brother, and for me, he disappeared, but for him, I disappeared? No. I moved away a few years later, but I still feel like the experience was emotionally scarring for the both of us, because we saw someone vanish just right in front of our eyes. We still talk about it sometimes, and we still don't know what to make of it. Over the years, I've read about almost invisible entities taking after people like this, but I don't know. Texas has some pretty spooky stuff going on, and I've lived here all my life. Back when I was younger, my old man and I would hunt with my older brother and sister out in Kerrville. I remember our trailer would periodically smell like that rusty blood smell when we'd camp, but we always got used to it. There was some scary stuff that went on out there. I distinctly remember when I was 12 or so, and my dad had shot a deer right behind the shoulder, but it boogied, so we had to go tracking. It was around mid-November. It started to get dark real quick, so I had my SKS, which I've been killing deer on since I was younger than that. I had that on me, and I had a dull flashlight. My sister was back at camp cooking and reading, while we followed the blood trail. Being crafty, my dad put me in this valley where we found a pretty good pool of it, and I sat atop a boulder just to mark the spot while he took my brother and put him farther out past the tree line, deep along the ravine. Where we were, there were tons of rocks and boulders all over the place, so I got up on a boulder that had a pretty good vantage point. It also had a decent clearing of about 50 to 75 yards around me. Well, the night started to set in, and the temperature was around 50 or so, dropping into the 40s with me in the middle of this clearing with a light overcast and a full moon. I remember clicking the light off to save the battery and letting my eyes adjust to my surroundings, seeing the alternating pitch black to relatively moonlit valley in decent clarity. Just about 30 or 40 minutes after my brother and my dad started tromping through the woods, leaving me alone, I remember hearing some coyotes and seeing them on the outskirts of the clearing, not necessarily circling, though they paused for a bit to look, and then they continued on. I sat quietly on the boulder, watching nature go by with the wind picking up slowly, giving a gentle strobing effect with the cloud overcast, just alternating with light to no light. I heard them yip and howl a few times, and then they started to fade away. Minutes after that, I heard a resounding shot and a report of impact, like a boom with a quick thud after it, meaning it was some distance between the two. I figured that they either found the deer and put it down, or someone shot a coyote. Around that time, I heard a scream, which got me real worried. Then, just utter silence. The wind stopped howling. The squatty pine trees stopped rustling. I couldn't hear any of the yelping of the coyotes in the distance. Again, just dead silence. After a bit, I started hearing some light thuds on my right, like rocks banging together up a ways along the hillside. On the farthest distance, about 75 yards of the clearing, I saw a few rocks rolling down the side. I watched them, when they first came into view, bounce along, tumbling. Then, I just listened as the clouds blacked out in the clearing. And then I watched them again, come to a complete stop after a bit. Conventional thought snapped to me through the biting cold, and I got real low on the boulder, with my SKS ready in my hands, aiming at the point of origin, just hearing my breathing contrast harshly against the mind-numbing quiet. A few more rocks did this from the same spot, and I saw a dark outline through the trees. Not quite in the clearing, but rather a few yards deep in the trees. I saw a pair of antlers, when the light picked it back up, and then it went dark. I could hear some heavy breathing along the edge of the clearing, me thinking that it was the injured deer, keyed a little radio that we all had 3 times to signal distress so that my dad and brother would come back. I turned the volume really low, and I sat quietly on the rock, making sure not to silhouette myself as I peered into the darkness with my scope, trying to get a good picture. I remember seeing the outline, somewhat upright in the light, like it was a buck that stretched his neck out, then it going dark, and then nothing. I panicked a bit, despite just being 12, knowing the hooves of deer should clack pretty loudly if they moved at all, especially if it was that quiet. So I sat and waited, not moving a muscle, as that pool of blood next to me seemed to lazily waft itself into my nose. It wasn't particularly overpowering or anything, but it cut in pretty strong as I scanned again, when the clouds cleared up for a few moments, looking for anywhere that thing could have gone. My radio keyed back twice, meaning somebody wanted to talk, and my stomach dropped. I keyed 3 times again, and saw lights over my left shoulder where my dad and brother went down to track after the buck, still a few 100 yards or so off in the distance. I sat there alone, jittering quietly in the cold, in an absolute void, with a lingering hope that my dad and brother would catch up. The light went out again, and I could hear those rocks rolling, just a bit from a spot, just a little farther up the hill, but a few yards closer. The rocks rolled into vision when the cloud passed, and I looked up. I could see a dark figure, again, with antlers, 60-something yards away with a few trees in between. Knowing where my brother and dad were, I leveled out the rifle, and I started to wait for a clear shot. It stepped out, and I was a hair away from trigger falling when it went dark, so I waited patiently for the moon to come out again. When it did, whatever was out there had disappeared. It didn't make much sense considering that it was behind a few trees with some considerable openings to each side. I scanned again in the direction when the wind picked back up and the trees started to move, with the hillside coming alive again. I heard the footsteps of my family behind me around 90 yards out, and I slowly crept off the boulder to go meet them, keeping that rifle close to me the whole entire time. When we met, my brother started giving me crap about how I was screaming and crying about being all alone, while he and my old man were tracking blood. Being the good brother that he is, when I told him that I hadn't made a sound, they raised their brows and started claiming that I was full of crap. I asked about the shot that I heard, and apparently it was a ways off in the next property over, since we were on the property line. They found a pretty good blood trail that left the origin of where I was in just about a straight line all the way to some crushed brush and about 400 yards out. Having this deer bleed profusely the whole entire time was somewhat unreal. Then, after the trail ended, they moved around for a few thousand yards or so just to scan the area when they heard the shot, and it sounded like it was over the low fence line. I told them about seeing what I could describe as a deer, but I didn't say much on the subject, except that it left without me getting a good look at it. We hiked back up the hill in a staggered column with my brother picking up the rear with his lever action 243, and my dad leading with his 7mm Rem mag. Still scanning around, we made our way back to the truck. When we got there, my brother Cody and I hopped in the bed of the truck with him overlooking the cabin and me looking over the tailgate, and we started our way down a pretty long trail to the camp house. After a mile or so, we had to take a detour through the brush because a few trees had collapsed on the trail. So we started going round through some clearings in the Dodge. Just before we got back onto the trail, it got real tight with the trees, and we had to get out and walk in front of the truck to make sure it could fit. After getting everything cleared out and altering some limbs, we assumed the same spots on the truck, and were just about to get back to the road when I spotted another pair of different antlers nestled between the brush. At that moment I hollered to my dad, who, with his windows rolled down, took out his 1911 out the center console and blasted a buck between the eyes with a 230 GR HST, dropping it on the spot. It turns out that was the deer he was looking for, but it ended up a few miles down the path with a heart shot, which is pretty impossible. It looked like it had a good gouge on it, just a bit between the point of impact on the ribs, like it had fallen on punji sticks or something. There was no blood trail anywhere near, no, nothing. Just that deer standing between two bushes by itself with a nice assortment of gouges in it. We loaded it up in the back of the truck and I sat on top of it with my SKS pointed at its head for the rest of the night. Everything went according to plan after that. We skinned and quartered the deer up and iced the meat, but over the next 8 years or so, my brother and I would still hear screams in our hunts at night. There shouldn't be any people around for the next 10 or so miles. There were all kinds of burial grounds and stuff like that on the land. We found many piles of old arrowheads and Victorian-era utensils in old burned-out houses that had been there since the settlement of Texas. I told my sister about what happened, she being the oldest of the kids, and then she joked about it being a wendigo, as the Native Americans would call it. I think she was just teasing me though, but I'm not so sure it's a joke out there. But yeah, that's it. There were some other things, but nothing got me like that night. I never had another horrid run-in like that, but there were instances on that land that would creep me out. We'd find an old stone building with just piles of animal skulls stacked to the ceiling, filling the room up in there. There'd be all kinds of old, horribly rusted Civil War-era rifles stuck in the mud or lying around in the stone buildings with broken receivers and other ailments. There's lots of history up in there. At one point it was deep in Comanche territory, but I'm not too sure if they have something like the northern tribes as far as mythology goes. So, what'd you think of those encounters? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. Do you have one of your own? I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you want to. I also have a PayPal and a Patreon if that's something that you want to do, is like donate to the channel. Again, no pressure. And if you liked the video, then feel free to like and subscribe. And with that, I think I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump, and thank you for watching.